Twice each year, sunlight travels exactly 200 feet into solid rock. It bends through doorways, slides down a corridor carved from the living mountain, and illuminates three stone faces in absolute darkness. The fourth face, always the fourth, remains in shadow. This isn't luck. This isn't accident. This is precision that shouldn't exist in the 13th century BCE. I've stood in that corridor on one of those mornings. I've watched modern tourists check their watches as the light creeps forward, right on schedule, hitting its mark after more than 3,200 years. The temple guardians just smile. They've seen it hundreds of times. They know what's coming. But here's what kept me awake that night in my hotel room overlooking Lake Nasser. The ancient Egyptians who carved Abu Simbel had no computers, no laser levels, no precise astronomical instruments as we know them. Yet they calculated angles within fractions of a degree, aligned their temple to solar events separated by months, and built something that still works millennia later. Abu Simbel isn't just a temple, it's a question carved into a mountainside, and it's not the only one. The drive south from Aswan takes about 3 hours through desert that seems to remember older names. The road runs parallel to Lake Nasser, that massive reservoir that didn't exist until 1970, that drowned ancient Nubia beneath its waters, that nearly claimed Abu Simbel itself. Then you round a curve, and there they are, four massive figures seated in eternal stillness, each one 67 feet tall, emerging from the cliff face as if the mountain itself decided to take human form. The great temple faces east, directly toward the rising sun. Stand at the entrance just before dawn, and you'll feel something shift in the quality of light, in the temperature of the stone, in the very air. This isn't just a building, it's a machine, precisely engineered for a purpose we're still trying to fully understand. The colonnade stretches ahead of you into darkness. Somewhere deep in that corridor, twice each year, something extraordinary happens. The discovery, or rather the rediscovery, came in 1813. Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, a Swiss explorer traveling under the name Sheikh Ibrahim, heard rumors from local Nubians about massive statues buried in sand. He found the site nearly completely covered, just the heads of the colossi visible above the dunes that had accumulated over centuries. It took another 4 years before Giovanni Belzoni cleared enough sand to actually enter the temple. When he finally pushed through that entrance in 1817, the solar alignment was already there, already working, already waiting after thousands of years of darkness. Picture the Nile Valley in 1264 BCE. The river runs its ancient course, not yet dammed, not yet controlled. The climate is wetter than today, with more vegetation along the banks. Nubia stretches south, a land of gold and trade, of cultures older than Egypt's dynasties. Ramses II has been pharaoh for 15 years. He's already built more monuments than any king before him, but Abu Simbel will be different. This temple will mark the border of his empire. This temple will speak to the Nubians in a language of stone and shadow and light. The workers who carved these chambers weren't just skilled, they were solving problems that would challenge modern engineers. They needed to tunnel straight into sandstone, maintaining level floors and precise angles for more than 60 meters. They needed to calculate the exact position where sunlight would penetrate on specific dates. They needed to account for the latitude of Abu Simbel, 22.3 degrees north, and the tilt of Earth's axis. Most puzzling of all, they needed to create alignment for 2 dates, February 22 and October 22 in our modern calendar. The mathematics required are genuinely complex. The temple doesn't simply face east, it faces east-northeast at an azimuth of approximately 100 degrees. This angle allows sunlight to travel down the hypostyle hall, through the vestibule and into the sanctuary, only when the sun rises at a specific point on the horizon. That point shifts throughout the year as the sun's declination changes with the seasons. The ancient architects needed to choose their angle to capture the sun at precisely 2 moments, separated by roughly 8 months.
Here's where it gets strange. Those 2 dates, February 22 and October 22, have been interpreted as Ramses' birthday and coronation day, but we have no definitive proof of this. The dates themselves may have astronomical significance we haven't fully understood. Some researchers suggest they relate to the flooding of the Nile, others to stellar alignments with Sirius or other significant stars. The honest truth is we're making educated guesses about why these specific dates mattered enough to engineer an entire temple around them. Modern archaeoastronomers have studied this alignment extensively. In 1968, before the temple was moved, researchers measured the phenomenon with precision instruments. They confirmed that sunlight penetrated the full length of the corridor and illuminated 3 of the 4 statues in the sanctuary: Ra-Horakhti, the deified Ramses II, and Amun-Ra. The 4th statue, Ptah, god of the underworld and darkness, remained in shadow even as light filled the chamber around it. This selective illumination required calculations beyond simple alignment. The ancient builders needed to position each statue with centimeter precision to control which faces caught the light. The mainstream explanation focuses on Egyptian astronomical knowledge and observational techniques. Scholars point to Merkhet instruments, ancient plumb lines used for sighting, and the careful recording of solar positions over years or decades. The theory suggests that Egyptian priests tracked the sunrise position for many seasons, marked the desired points on the horizon, and worked backward to calculate the temple's orientation. It's plausible. It's reasonable, but it requires a level of patience and precision that still impresses modern astronomers. An alternative theory suggests the alignment might be accidental, a fortunate coincidence of the temple's eastward orientation. This seems less likely given the architectural choices. The corridor's length, width, and door placements all serve to narrow and direct the light beam. These aren't random decisions. Every element works together to create the phenomenon. The modern Nubians whose ancestors witnessed the temple's construction carry stories passed through countless generations. They speak of the builders watching the sun, marking stones at dawn over many seasons, understanding the sky through observation that bordered on reverence. There's mention in oral traditions of master astronomers who could predict the sun's position years in advance, who held knowledge of the heavens that went beyond simple calendar keeping. Whether these stories preserve actual historical memory or represent later interpretations is impossible to say definitively.
Today, you can join the crowds who gather twice yearly to witness the solar alignment. The Egyptian government organizes official celebrations on February 21st, 22nd and October 21st, 22nd. Visitors arrive in darkness, waiting in the temple courtyard as the sun approaches the horizon. The moment itself lasts about 20 minutes. Light gradually fills the sanctuary, and you can watch ancient stone faces emerge from shadow into golden illumination. It's worth noting that after the temple's relocation in the 1960s, the alignment shifted by 1 day. It now occurs on the 21st rather than the 22nd of each month. Despite all our modern technology, we couldn't quite match the ancient precision. What strikes me most about this place is the audacity of the original vision. Whoever conceived this temple wasn't thinking in terms of years or even decades. They were building for millennia. They trusted that their astronomical calculations would hold true across centuries they would never see. And they were right. That confidence, that certainty in their own understanding of cosmic mechanics says something profound about ancient Egyptian intellectual achievement that textbooks often miss. The solar alignment continues. Twice each year, light travels through stone, finding faces in darkness, keeping an appointment made more than 3,000 years ago. The how remains partially understood, The why holds mysteries we may never fully answer, and that fourth face stays in shadow, just as it was designed to do, for reasons that seem obvious until you really think about them.
Approach the Great Temple from the north, and your eyes go immediately to the seated colossi, 4 massive figures of Ramses II, each carved from the living rock, each showing the pharaoh in the prime of his power. But one is wrong. The second colossus from the left is damaged, its upper body and head broken away, fragments scattered at its feet. Stand there long enough and a question forms: when did this happen? The conventional answer is earthquake. Most tour guides will tell you this without hesitation, but here's the uncomfortable part. We don't actually know which earthquake, or when, or whether earthquake damage explains everything we see. The broken colossus is a mystery hiding in plain sight, a puzzle that everyone acknowledges, but few people examine closely. When Burckhardt found Abu Simbel in 1813, the colossus was already damaged. His descriptions mention the broken statue exactly as we see it today. When Belzoni entered the temple 4 years later, nothing had changed. Every photograph and drawing from the 19th century shows the same damage pattern. This tells us the breaking happened before European documentation, but it doesn't tell us when. The Nile Valley in ancient times experienced seismic activity. The African plate's interaction with the Arabian plate creates fault lines running through Egypt. The historical record preserves accounts of earthquakes affecting temples and settlements. A significant earthquake struck the region around 27 BCE, documented in Roman records. This quake caused widespread damage throughout Egypt and might explain the Colossus. But other earthquakes occurred in the centuries that followed, one around 27 CE, another around 200 CE, others later still. The damage pattern itself raises questions. The statue broke roughly at chest level. The upper body and head collapsed forward, with major fragments falling between the Colossus's legs and at the base of the throne. The break isn't clean. It's not a simple fracture along an obvious weakness in the stone. If you examine the remaining lower portion, you can see how the sculptors worked with the natural layers of sandstone, orienting the statue to minimize stress along bedding planes. They knew what they were doing. This wasn't a carving waiting to fail. Structural engineers who've studied the damage suggest that pure earthquake shaking wouldn't necessarily cause this specific failure pattern. Earthquakes create complex force patterns: vertical jolts, horizontal shaking, twisting motions. A seated statue is relatively stable, with a low center of gravity and massive base. For the upper body to break away cleanly while the lower portion remained intact suggests a particular type of stress application. Some researchers have proposed that the earthquake might have been preceded or followed by rockfalls from above, with boulders striking the statue's upper portion. Others wonder if weathering weakened the stone before seismic activity finished the job. Here's something that bothers me. None of the other 3 colossi show similar damage. The statue to the immediate left of the broken one is intact. The 2 on the right are intact. They're all carved from the same cliff face, from the same geological formation, subject to the same weathering, the same earthquakes, the same forces. Why did only one fail? One theory points to natural weaknesses in that particular section of stone. Sandstone can contain fault planes, areas where mineral composition changes, zones of different hardness. Perhaps the second colossus was carved through a section with hidden flaws that made it vulnerable. The ancient sculptors might not have detected these weaknesses until after substantial work had been completed, then chose to proceed rather than start over. It's a practical explanation, but it assumes a level of risk acceptance that seems at odds with the perfection demanded elsewhere in the temple. An alternative explanation is more unsettling to consider: deliberate vandalism. Egypt's history includes periods of iconoclasm, times when later rulers defaced monuments of their predecessors. The damage to the Colossus shows no obvious tool marks, but weathering over centuries could have erased such evidence. The Amarna period, when Akhenaten imposed monotheism, saw systematic destruction of traditional god images.
Later rulers attacked Akhenaten's monuments in turn. Ramses II himself usurped earlier structures, recarving them with his own names and images. Could a later pharaoh have damaged Abu Simbel deliberately? The problem with the vandalism theory is motive. Abu Simbel is remote, far from major population centers, even in ancient times. It wasn't a temple of daily worship for Theban priests or Memphis nobility. It was a border monument, a demonstration of power aimed at Nubia. Attacking it would require significant effort with limited political benefit. Most iconoclasm targeted highly visible monuments in major cities where the destruction sent clear messages to large audiences. Local Nubian traditions offer intriguing fragments that don't quite resolve the mystery. Some stories speak of the broken colossus as the one who angered the sun, suggesting the damage carries religious significance. Other accounts mention a great shaking that toppled the pharaoh's face, confirming the earthquake hypothesis, but without specific dating. There are whispers of older stories, now lost, that attributed the breaking to divine judgment or cosmic battles, but these may be 19th century romanticism rather than authentic tradition. Modern researchers studying the site have access to tools the earlier explorers lacked. Ground-penetrating radar has mapped the cliff face behind the temple facade. Seismic monitoring instruments track current geological activity. Materials scientists have analyzed the sandstone composition, looking for the variations that might explain differential weathering. What they've found is that the cliff face does contain heterogeneous zones. The stone isn't uniform. Some sections are slightly harder, slightly more resistant to erosion. The broken colossus sits in a zone of transition between different geological layers.
During the temple's relocation in the 1960s, engineers had to cut the entire facade into manageable blocks. They photographed and documented every fracture, every weakness, every structural detail. Their reports note that the area where the damaged colossus stands showed more natural fracturing than other sections. The stone was pre-stressed by geological forces, already under strain before human hands ever touched it. This lends weight to the natural weakness theory. But here's what keeps the mystery alive. Why didn't the ancient Egyptians repair it? If the damage occurred during the temple's active period, say in the earthquake of 27 BCE, the site was still in use. Priests maintained the cult, the temple received offerings, yet no one attempted to rebuild the fallen colossus, to carve a replacement, to restore the intended symmetry. The Egyptians were masters of stone repair. They fixed damaged monuments throughout their history. Their silence here, their acceptance of the broken state, might tell us something. Perhaps the damage happened late in the temple's active life, when resources for major repairs were no longer available. Perhaps it occurred after the temple had already been largely abandoned. Or perhaps there's a meaning in the broken state that we're missing. Some scholars suggest the damaged colossus might have been left deliberately as a memorial, a reminder of divine power or natural forces beyond human control. That feels like projection to me, reading our own sensibilities into an ancient culture, but I can't entirely dismiss it. My own feeling is that the truth involves multiple factors. The stone was weaker in that location due to geological variations. An earthquake, probably the 27 BCE event, though we can't be certain, provided the final stress that caused failure. The damage occurred late enough that major repairs weren't politically or economically justified, especially as the temple's importance declined in the Roman period. Nothing mysterious about any individual factor, but the combination, the specific intersection of geology and seismic timing and cultural change creates a puzzle that resists simple solution. You can touch the broken fragments today, the massive pieces of stone that once formed a pharaoh's face. They rest between the colossus's legs, smoothed by wind and tourists' hands. Looking up at the break, then down at the fragments, you can see how they fit together, how they once formed a whole. The question of when they separated has echoed through centuries without finding a definitive answer. Sometimes the simplest questions are the ones that keep their secrets longest.
During the massive relocation project of the 1960s, engineers made discoveries that weren't supposed to happen. The plan was straightforward: cut the temples into blocks, move them to higher ground, reassemble them before Lake Nasser flooded the original site. It was archaeological engineering on an unprecedented scale. But when the cutting began, when the mountain started revealing its interior, the workers found spaces that weren't on any ancient map. The Simbel temples aren't simply carved facades fronting shallow rooms. They're massive excavations into solid rock, extending deep into the cliff. The Great Temple penetrates roughly 63 meters from entrance to back wall. That's approximately 185 cubic meters of sandstone that was removed, carried out, disposed of somewhere. The interior space includes the Great Hall with its 8 columns, a vestibule, the sanctuary, and several side chambers. All of this was documented. All of this was known before relocation began. What wasn't documented were the additional hollows, the dead-end passages, the sealed spaces found within the rock itself during the cutting process. Some of these were clearly unfinished work, rooms started but abandoned, corridors that ran a few meters then stopped. Others were different. They were finished, smoothed, then deliberately sealed with carefully fitted stone blocks. Swedish engineer Ove Arup, part of the relocation team, wrote in his project notes about unexpected voids encountered during the cutting. The technical challenge these spaces created was significant. Every void meant potential structural weakness in the blocks being created. The engineers needed to map them precisely, then cut around them or fill them for stability. What puzzles researchers is that some of these chambers didn't appear to serve any architectural or religious function in the temple's known design. Think about the logistical challenge of carving Simbel originally. Workers would have started from the outside, removing stone layer by layer, working inward. They needed consistent lighting, which means oil lamps or torches filling the space with smoke. They needed ventilation to breathe and to clear the smoke. They needed ways to haul the cut stone out as they worked deeper. They needed to maintain precise measurements in darkness and dust. Every meter deeper into the mountain added complexity. Given those challenges, every cubic meter of stone removed represented significant labor. The Egyptians didn't casually excavate. Every space served a purpose: ritual, storage, structural, or symbolic. So when we find finished chambers that don't connect to the main temple layout, that don't appear in religious texts, that were sealed rather than used, we need to ask why they exist. One chamber discovered during relocation sat roughly 15 meters behind the sanctuary's rear wall. It was small, approximately 2 meters square, but carefully finished with smooth walls and floor. The entrance had been sealed with fitted blocks and mortar. When opened, it contained nothing. No artifacts, no offerings, no inscriptions, no debris. Just empty space carved into living rock, then hidden away.
The conventional archaeological interpretation is that these are foundation deposits or symbolic chambers. Ancient Egyptian temple construction included ritual elements where sealed chambers contained offerings to stabilize the building spiritually. These deposits often held foundation plaques, amulets, model tools, or small statues. The problem with applying this explanation to Simbel's hidden chambers is the absence of such items. If they were foundation deposits, they were cleaned out at some point, or they never contained objects in the first place. Another theory suggests these spaces related to the construction process itself. Perhaps they were test chambers, places where architects verified their cutting techniques before committing to main rooms. Perhaps they were workshops where specific carving happened in situ. Perhaps they served as repositories for stone removed from other areas during excavation. These explanations feel utilitarian and practical, but they don't account for the careful finishing and deliberate sealing. A more intriguing possibility involves water. The relocation teams discovered that the original temple site had complex drainage patterns. Water infiltrating the porous sandstone would accumulate and flow according to the rock's internal structure. Some of the sealed chambers might have been designed to manage this water, to capture and redirect it away from decorated spaces. Ancient Egyptian architects understood hydrology well. They built temples with hidden drainage systems throughout their history. Abu Simbel's remote location and the cliff's geological composition might have required special water management features. What complicates all these theories is that some chambers appear to have religious significance that was then deliberately obscured. One space found during relocation contained faint traces of paint on the walls, reds and blacks typical of Egyptian religious art, but weathering or intentional erasure had removed any recognizable images or hieroglyphs. Why decorate a chamber, then seal it? Why erase decorations before sealing? The sequence of actions suggests changing intentions or religious motivations we don't fully understand. The Nubian workers involved in both the original construction and the 1960s relocation passed down stories of rooms within rooms, spaces that the pharaoh's workers carved for purposes known only to the high priests. These oral traditions are difficult to verify, but suggest hidden chambers were part of the temple's original mystery, not just modern discoveries. The stories don't specify what these chambers contained or why they were concealed, only that their existence was acknowledged among the builders. Modern archaeological practice would demand full documentation and study of any sealed chambers before and after opening. The 1960s relocation happened under emergency conditions, racing against Lake Nasser's rising waters. Documentation was good by the standards of the time, but it wasn't exhaustive. Some chambers may have been opened, examined briefly, found empty, and noted in technical reports that focused on structural rather than archaeological details. Those reports still exist in UNESCO archives and Swedish engineering files, but they've never been fully analyzed by archaeologists specifically looking for hidden spaces.
Ground-penetrating radar studies conducted in recent years have suggested additional voids within the reassembled temple structure. These readings are difficult to interpret because the modern reconstruction involved concrete reinforcement, steel supports, and artificial mountain material. Distinguishing between ancient chambers and modern engineering spaces in the data requires sophisticated analysis. Some researchers believe at least 2 or 3 additional sealed chambers remain unexplored within the current structure. What strikes me most about this mystery is how it inverts our usual archaeological narrative. Typically, we excavate to find hidden things. We dig into mounds, we open tombs, we uncover what was buried. At Abu Simbel, the temple itself contained the hidden things, and we only found them by taking the temple apart. There's something almost poetic about that reversal. The sacred structure holds secrets in its very substance, revealed only through dismantling. The sealed chambers of Abu Simbel might be nothing more than architectural features we don't fully understand, remnants of construction practices that made perfect sense to the ancient builders but baffle us now. Or they might represent religious mysteries, ritual spaces known only to initiated priests, serving purposes described in texts we haven't found or can't read. Either way, they remind us that even the most studied monuments can still surprise us, still hold spaces we haven't explored, still keep secrets carved in stone and darkness. 3 mysteries, carved and hidden in a mountain beside a river that has flowed for millennia. The sun that keeps its appointment, the giant that fell and stayed fallen, the chambers sealed within stone, the speaking sanctuary. Each one reveals something about human ambition and capability in ages we often underestimate. What connects these mysteries isn't that they're unexplained, though pieces of each puzzle remain missing. What connects them is what they tell us about the people who created Abu Simbel. They were thinking across timescales we barely contemplate. They were working with precision we still struggle to match with all our technology. They understood principles of astronomy, engineering, geology, and acoustics well enough to implement them in solid rock with no room for error. I've stood at many ancient sites, felt the weight of many mysteries. Abu Simbel affects me differently than most. Maybe it's the audacity of the original vision, carving temples into a mountain just to mark a border, just to say, here stands Egypt. Maybe it's the modern miracle of moving the entire complex to save it from drowning. Maybe it's the way the place layers mystery upon mystery, old questions and new ones, ancient purpose and modern wonder. The temples wait beside Lake Nasser now, higher than their original position, preserved for generations we won't see. Twice each year, the sun still enters the sanctuary, still finds those three faces in the dark. The fourth face stays in shadow. The broken colossus keeps its silence about when and why it fell. The sealed chambers hold their emptiness. The stones still manipulate sound in ways we document but don't entirely explain. We call these things mysteries, but maybe that's our limitation rather than theirs. Perhaps to the architects, the priests, the workers who carved these chambers, there was no mystery. There was knowledge, carefully guarded, precisely applied, built into stone that would outlast dynasties and floodwaters and changing beliefs. I left Abu Simbel at sunset, the colossi dark against the western sky. The desert stretched away toward horizons unchanged since Ramses' time. Somewhere in that landscape are answers to questions I haven't asked yet, solutions to puzzles I haven't recognized. The ancient world keeps teaching if we're willing to listen. The stones keep speaking if we learn their language. The mystery isn't that we don't understand everything about Abu Simbel. The mystery is that after 3,200 years, these temples still work, still function, still create the experiences they were designed to create. That's not a failure of ancient planning. That's a triumph we're still learning to appreciate.